Chapter 20, the first page. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Even if it's an endless abyss, it's still possible to climb out. The reason why Ze Tian Ji could make such judgment on Chen Chongsheng's destiny was because after Chen Chongsheng got out of the Tradition Academy abyss, there were still two words that would suppress him: the Divine Queen and Pope. The Pope was kind, gentle, and had started to forget the past. He remembered the friendship between the principal of the Tradition Academy and himself. He was unwilling to let the Tradition Academy become real history, so he closed his eyes and ignored the problem. But what about the Divine Queen? That year the Tradition Academy was the main source of the power struggle. The old royal families had employed them as an army to fight against her. How could she permit the Tradition Academy revitalize and shine again? Anyone would know, in the Divine Queen's dictionary there was never a word called pardon. Countless royal family members lied in blood, and Zhou Tong who could scare infants from crying were apparent evidence. The Tradition Academy wanted a rebirth. Unless the Divine Queen abdicated or died, it would not happen. But would the Divine Queen abdicate? Could anyone kill her? No, that abyss would always be an abyss. Chen Chongsheng returned to the inn. As usual, he spent 15 minutes to wash his face and brush his teeth. He washed his clothes, used towels to rub his wet hair until it dried up, wore up clean clothes, held a pot of green tea, walked to the tree in the yard, sat on a bamboo chair, and began watching the stars. Because he is very concerned about time the most, Chen Chongsheng would only allow himself to take a few glances at the beautiful evening sky and stars. After obtaining some spiritual power from the stars which stayed in permanent positions, he took out the recommendation letter with the Pope's signature on it. He began to replay the events that happened today and the encounters he had. After standing in the hallway in the Department of Traditional Education for half a day, he remembered that he received a recommendation letter. He understood what the Pope's signature meant. The change in Officer Xian's attitudes toward him were too obvious. It brought him a lot of advantages, but at the same time made him question many things. Why would Nanny Ning give this recommendation letter to him? If they only wanted him to shut up or give back the engagement, he believed that these people who possessed unimaginable power had countless ways. Out of all the methods they had, this method of using the recommendation was the hardest to understand. It felt like someone was compensating him for some debts. What was the opponent trying to compensate for? Was it for his silence regarding the engagement? Or was the Tradition Academy really not a good place to go to? He clearly remembered that Nanny Ning had said this was the best choice for everyone, but it does not apply to him. What problem was the Tradition Academy having? He knew the glorified history the Tradition Academy had, but the event in which the Tradition Academy became a ghost school occurred in more than a decade ago. Because the event occurred far too recent, there were no recorded history when the Divine Queen is still in power. He could only make some guesses based on Officer Xian's reaction, Officer Xian's enthusiastic and friendly attitude, but at the same time wanted to keep his distances from him. The Pope's recommendation only worked to some extent, suggesting that the issue regarding the Tradition Academy could even offset the Pope's influence to some extent. He thought about the problem, but he did not understand. He decided to not continue wasting his time guessing. Even if there was a problem, he wouldn't care anyway. What he wanted originally wasn't what those big figures did not want to give. He did not want this engagement. He simply wanted to obtain a permit to directly participate in the great trial. Simultaneously, he needed to read a lot of books. Master didn't lie about there being many books collected and stored in the 6 ivies. Chen Chongsheng woke up at 5, cleaned up, ate, and prepared according to the same schedule he followed in the past 14 years. He spent a bit more time on packing and moving them to the wagon, which called last night. Along with the morning sunlight shining on his right shoulder, he left the inn that he lived in for several days. He marched forward to the Tradition Academy near the royal palace north of the city. He did not check out because he did not lack money and because he knew that he definitely would come back. On the day he comes back, he wouldn't stand on the balcony behind the inn and look in a daze at the mausoleum of the books far away. Instead, he would definitely walk into the mausoleum of the books, see those legendary tablets closely. In the depths of the 100 Blossom Street, unlike the quietness that was common in the past decades, noises filled the block and several hundred servants and workers were busily working. Seeing the leftover torches on the ground, it was easy to see that these workers have pulled an all-nighter working and hadn't rested. Chen Chongsheng moved the luggage near the lake and discovered that Officer Xian never appeared. He trusted his guess more, and it was good that the things Officer Xian promised him was prosecuted without trouble. He looked as the academy that looked like the cemetery yesterday slowly restore its former glory. The ruined buildings weren't easy to fix in a short amount of time. But with hundreds of people working on it, the appearance of the buildings looked much better. Especially the small buildings in the woods because they were cleaned up very nicely. After the rotten smell vanish, people can start living in them right away. The hundreds of people working busily to restore the academy were the lowest rank of servants from the Department of Holy Education. They were responsible for the cleaning of the Heavenly Academy and such tasks in the past years. Although they didn't understand the reason to clean and organize the ruined classical teaching, they still did their work expertly. Even working all night didn't affect their progress rate. After checking the buildings around him, it was clear that the cleanup process was basically done. Chen Chongsheng carried his luggage and walked into another building right next to the library while the servants were looking at him curiously and respectfully. As he entered, a wave of rotten smell hit him. Although it was less intense than yesterday, it was still strong enough to be detected. It seems that even with the sun and wind, it would still take a few days for the smell to vanish. Chen Chongsheng disliked the rotten smell, therefore he didn't stay after he set his luggage in the building and left right away. His destination was the library right next door. Following his request from yesterday, the library wasn't cleaned by the workers. The key was in his hands, so even if they wanted to help they couldn't enter. The workers were all busy cleaning up the main buildings and there were not a single person around. The surrounding was filled with silence. Chen Chongsheng walked up the stairs and arrived at the front door. He took out the key that he obtained from the Department of Education and sticked it into the keyhole. After the key was stuck inside the keyhole, the green rust was scraped up and fell onto the ground. The key was twisted slightly and smoothly. Chen Chongsheng detected clearly that some of the system inside the bronze locket was activated and returned to its original position. The presence that he detected earlier also hid inside the deepest parts of the locket. The entire process was magical. He pushed the door and entered. The first thing he saw was rows and rows of bookshelves. The bookshelves occupied most of the library and it was hard to see the end of it. It gave him a sense of visual stimulation. Countless books were packed upon the shelves, and Chen Chongsheng was happy to see this image. When he noticed that the dusts weren't as much as he saw yesterday, he was even happier. The classical teaching was in ruins for many years. The desks and chairs inside the other buildings were stolen and sold. There wasn't even any bed left in the dorms. Officer Xian requested the department to speed up the cleaning and repairing process last night. Since this library was closed, it was protected very nicely. Chen Chongsheng got some cleaning tools and cleaned around the library for a bit. Suddenly he noticed the floor and shiny and reflective, it was actually made from the expensive sandalwood. He shook his head, he thought to himself, who would have knew that this academy was so rich during its peak, but fell into the dusts for so many years. What should he do next? It's time for him to Xiuxing. Chen Chongsheng found an index in the drawer of the library and walked into the long shelves. It didn't take too long for him to find the first book he desired. The book's title was Purification. The name of the book was simple, just from a single glance you know it talked about the process and instructions of the purification stage. But due to its simplicity, it was also common. To defend against the demon race which held powerful strength and enormous talents, it was forbidden to keep the basics of Xiuxing and ways of purification as a secret in the human world. of course, the large sects have their own ways, but the basics of Xiaoxing was just like the stone pillars of the mausoleum of knowledge, everyone could see and study them. This book of purification was a Xiuxing instruction that could be bought from any city or village. But Chen Changsheng never read it, because during the past 14 years in his life, his master always told him it was unnecessary. It won't be late for him to study when it was his time to study. When he asked when it would be his time, Chen Changsheng's master never answered him. Right before he left Xining and said he will travel to the capital and visit the Mausoleum of Knowledge and Temple Lingyan. That day, his master finally said to him, "Then, you can start Xiuxing." He picked up the purification and walked to the door. He sat on the mobbed floor and used the sunlight to read. He opened the first page. Logically speaking, he should be excited or even nervous at this moment. But he wasn't. During this process, there was not a single change in his expression. It was very calm, it seemed like he underwent this process countless times. If others were watching this scene, they wouldn't have guessed that it was his first time reading books about Xiuxing. In the General's Mansion and the Heavenly Academy, he said this sentence, "It's not that I can't Xiuxing, it's just I haven't started to Xiuxing." He had millions of chances to start Xiuxing, but it wasn't his time yet. He waited for a long time, and this day finally arrived. Perhaps he waited too long and he was too exhausted to be excited. All that was left was calmness. He flipped open the first page of the book. There started out with a single line. The meaning will be understood after 100 times of reading. Chapter 21, Way of Reading. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The first page was just an introduction. There were only a sentence in it and the rest of the page was blank. The sentence attracted every reader's eyes and no one can miss this line when they flipped open the book. Normally when people read this line, they would first think thoroughly about the actual meaning behind this sentence. Then with their own understanding, they would continue to read. But Chen Changsheng was different, he didn't continue to flip to the next page. Rather he stood up and walked to a bookshelf and searched for a couple of other books about purification and skimmed through them quickly. After realizing every book's introduction contained the same opening sentence, he returned to his spot and continued reading. His mind was concentrated upon the white paper and there was no other distraction in his eyes except the book. The wording of purification was simple, but he read very carefully. Not much later he has already finished the first chapter. This chapter talked about the way to nurture one's spirit and mind. But he didn't stop after this chapter to think or try. He continued reading and quickly the following chapter's materials were all memorized in his head. They mainly talked about the way to nurture one's spirit, finding the destined star, and absorbing the starlight into one's body. He only used an hour to finish reading, and then he closed his book and started to meditate. After taking 10 deep breaths, he opened his eyes and started to flip through the pages again and reread the entire book. This time he finished reading the book faster. It only took the amount of time to burn a few incenses. Then he once again closed his eyes and thought about the materials in the book. After a few breaths, he opened his eyes once again and started reading. Even after repeating this procedure for a few times, the sunlight from outside of the window was still intense and burning. He closed the pages of purification one last time, however, this time he didn't open it again. He took out his ink and brush, but he didn't open the book's pages. He started to record his thoughts that popped up during reading and began to memorize the entire book. Not for long, many words were written upon the white paper. When Chen Changsheng finally set his brush upon the resting stone, the entire book of purification was carved into his brain. But the most important thing is, it's not just memorization, it's understanding. This is Chen Changsheng's way of reading. This way was quite unique. His senior and him used almost 10 years of continuous reading to create this precious technique. The old temple in Xining village may be unnoticeable, but the quantity and quality of the book stored in it was as deep and endless as the ocean. If they want to memorize all of them in such a short time, then they must use some special methods. To use this method of reading, they don't need to read the book over and over and over until the cover was hanging off the pages. As a matter of fact, the book stored inside the old temple of Xining village looked just as new as when it was made. However, the contents inside the books were memorized entirely by the two apprentices. The most important part of this method would be the last step, note-taking. It didn't matter if he wrote the notes on a paper or inside his head. The meaning to it was to reorganize and accept the entire book. Only after completing this step, the reader could say he has completely transferred the wisdom in the book into his knowledge. After reading Purification and closing its pages, Chen Chongqing didn't stop learning. Rather he continued to do so in his mind and notebook. But what is the purpose of learning? It's to practice. The reason he read Purification was to successfully purify himself and begin the way of Xiuxing. The first step of the purification stage was to concentrate one's mind. The mind is the human's core of spiritual strength. To explain it clearly, it's the thought that counts. If one's thought was concentrated and strong enough, then it would turn into a certain power. Although it may sound easy, in reality it's not. Even if an ordinary person struggled extremely hard and imagined that they can fly freely in the sky, they are still trapped on the ground. This is because the power of mind depends on the strength of one's soul, and the soul's strength depends solely on talent and is unrelated to one's effort. Even if an ordinary person tried his best, how would his soul's strength surpass that one of the reincarnation of the sky phoenix? Chen Chongsheng has prepared to Xiuxing for many years. To be precise, it started when he was 10 years old and an odd occurrence happened to his body. He kept on waiting for this day to come silently. He knew there were some problems with his veins, and that's why his master said his was ill. His 9 main veins in his body weren't connected and his soul power couldn't circulate throughout his body. The result of this was that his spiritual power kept on leaking out. Although this occurrence has been suppressed by his master using medicine and herbs, it was a problem. Or why else would the black sensory stone in the Heavenly Academy's entrance test not detect any soul strength inside his body? If his soul was not strong enough, then how could he solidify his spirit? If there was no spirit, how would there be a mission? The first step of purification, how should he achieve it? Chen Chongqing did not feel disappointed like the people who found out they could not Xiuxing, and of course he wouldn't feel hopeless. He believed that years ago there must have been people with great wisdom that solved this problem beforehand already because there were so many people like him. In the scrolls of the ways he had read, there were often people who couldn't Xiuxing in the beginning. Then they discovered a genius way and eventually became one of the strongest Xiuxingists. One such example was Wang Jisoo. However, he did not prepare to follow their steps because he never saw the same situation he had within the books. Even his master said it's incurable, then it's his destiny. He did not have extra time to fight against the destiny. He also didn't think he could find a new genius method in such a short amount of time he was given. He liked to follow the trend. He thought that even if he followed the existent method in the world, he would also be able to solidify his spirit and begin Xiuxing. He trusted the ancients' wisdom more than anyone else. After reading hundreds of times, the meaning will reveal itself. All the books related to purification had these marked words. Obviously, these words were the key to purification, which was what the ancients were trying to tell their next generations, but which book should he read? Chen Chongsheng looked at a densely packed table of contents at the back of the purification. He looked at the names showing different methods the authors wrote down and shook his head. He didn't expect that after coming to the capital, he still had to continue the life he had in Xining town. If in the places like the Heavenly Academy or the Start Acre Academy, if students needed to pass the purification stage, obviously there would be teachers telling them, the key of purification was to read massive amount of related books, so they could achieve the goal of strengthening soul, and therefore solidify their spirit at once. Purification was simply the general principle. What one really needed to study were the 49 books behind the cover. Of course, this did not mean that all students had to read these 40 books 100 times in order to strengthen their soul to the extent they had solidified their spirit. Most of the time when they are reading, the reader's spirits would already be solidified and they would complete the process. It's not true that the earlier the completion of the process the better. If one finished reading a book 10 times and he solidified his spirit successfully, then this person would be the Xiao Xingist with the weakest spirit in history. Vice versa, the more books one read and the more times he read, his soul would become stronger and stronger, and if he could still not break through that layer of thin paper after reading so much, then when he finally solidified his spirit would truly be strong. If there was one who could finish reading all of the 49 books in the Purification's table of contents 100 times, then eventually he would solidify his spirit. He would have the possibility of achieving the perfect stage of purification. Such situation was extremely rare. Besides the lucky ones who possessed gifted and born bloodlines, there is basically no one who could achieve it. This was a very exciting process. As time passed, the amount of books read and amount of times reread increased, one would expect oneself to become a genius with strong spirit. But also most likely, eventually one could not solidify his spirit at all, and could only stay as a regular person. Hope and disappointment would continuously enlarge as the process of reading passed. Eventually this would become an extremely big gamble. The result of the game would only appear after you finished reading these books. After reading 100 times, the result would automatically come out. After reading 100 times, the meaning will reveal itself. That's what the quote meant. After finishing purification 1 time, Chen Changxing didn't feel any change occurred in his body and didn't detect any soul power. Which means of course, he didn't sense any spiritual strength. He didn't start immediately reading the books again, but rather he started calculating. He was confident that his rate of reading was faster than that of a regular person. Then he probably didn't need to read 100 times, perhaps 20 or 30 times would be enough. There were 49 books on the index, and using the average reading speed, he can finish 7 books at most in 1 day. This means that he will finish reading all of the books once in 7 days. Even if his speed increases over time, to finish reading all of these books for 100 times would be approximately half a year. Does he have the leisure to read books for half a year? No. Then what should he do? For the first time after arriving to the capital he felt irritated. If others knew his confusion now, they would definitely have a different feeling, because in his calculation it's so obvious that he would have to finish reading all of these books 100 times. Then he would begin solidifying his spirit, and if he could actually solidify his spirit, in other words, from the beginning to the end, even subconsciously, he had always considered himself on the same level or even higher than those geniuses. It was not a wonder that the first time Tang 36 had met him, Tang 36 had thought Chen Changsheng was arrogant. He may seem quiet and had good mannerism, but in fact he has complete confidence in himself in some areas. This made people feel that he was arrogant and self-centered. Just when he was thinking, he felt a light breeze and a shadow covered him and the words on the book. Chen Changsheng raised his head and saw a pretty young girl smiling coldly at him. Because at this moment he was sitting on the ground, the girl was obviously looking down on him. The young girl was Shuang Er from the general's mansion. She glanced at the book he was reading and understood his actions. She mocked, "You began to purify yourself when you are 14 years old, don't you think it's a little too late?" Chen Changsheng replied, "There are early and late comers to the way of Xiuxing. Some started early but arrived late. Some started late but arrived early." Shuang Er didn't expect to hear this kind of reply. She was stunned for a moment and mocked again, 49 scrolls of book, 100 times, 10 days. This is the record that my lady set when she started to purify when she was 4 years old. Start late but arrive early. How early can you get? Chen Changxing thought for a moment, but he didn't know how to reply. Editor Bing. T.T. My hope be broken. I never knew that Shuang Er was so mean. T.T. My dreams be going BB. Chapter 22, it's just this simple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After reading hundreds of times, the meaning will reveal itself, but some people only need 10 days while others will require half a year. This kind of difference makes many speechless. Just like Tang 36 had said, that girl often left others speechless. Chen Changsheng also didn't say anything either. Secretly, Shuang Er was unhappy of Chen Changsheng's quiet and stiff reaction. Perhaps she thought that since he has a marriage vow with the lady, even if their status differed greatly, at least he should show some sort of ambition or confidence. Also from her point of view, if it weren't for her lady that wrote a letter from the Nanxi temple, Chen Changsheng would be dead already. How would he have the chance to enter the classical teaching and sit on a clean floor to read and shoshing? Although she didn't need his appreciation, he shouldn't be silent either and treating it like nothing happened. Shuang Er looked at him and shook her head. She took out a thin piece of letter from her pocket and handed it to him. Since you obtained the precious chance to shoshing, then you should appreciate it and start from ground zero. Don't think of some strange way to boost yourself and place your hope upon others, especially women. Suddenly she thought of something and said strictly, shoshing is never simple. Even if you don't have any hope, I hope you won't self-destruct. Do you understand? Chen Changsheng took the paper and was stunned for a moment. He didn't understand what she was trying to say. He thought to himself, even if he had hid in an academy as gloomy as a cemetery to read and shoshing, the general's mansion and that Lady Su still think of him as an obstacle. The sun outside of the library was hanging in the middle of the sky. The tree leaves were rocking back and forth from the breeze. The sunlight scattered under the tree and landed upon the earth. Luckily it was still early spring, so the temperature wasn't too hot. The piece of letter contained a girl's fragrance but had no trace of sweat. Chen Changsheng looked at the sentence upon the letter and remained silent for a long time. Look out for yourself. The penmanship of the words were neat, but had nothing special. The strokes were very straight, which seemed naive and cute. Although Chen Changsheng guessed that this sentence was written by Lady Su from the south, he couldn't connect the girl who has this sort of naive penmanship with the talented girl who is famous throughout the world. He understood the sentence and it seemed as if he could faintly see the expression on Lady Su's face when she wrote this sentence. For sure she had a cold face and wrinkled eyebrows, which expressed her impatience and irritation. But mostly, it was indifference. She only wrote a sentence for him, but the most important word was yourself. Yourself meant you. You live. You read. You shoshing. You eat and sleep. Chen Changsheng thought quietly for a moment and didn't think any further. He collected the letter and put it in his pocket. Then he stood up and walked to the bookshelf to find the 49 books mentioned in the end of Purification. While he was searching, he thought about the words made Shuang Er said previously and wrinkled his eyebrows. His fingers slowed down during his search for the books. Does it only need 10 days to read all of these books 100 times? How did she accomplish this? Purification was just a summary. The 49 books mentioned at the end of it was the actual studying material. The students need to use the knowledge and wisdom in those books to open their mind and solidify their view of the world to strengthen their souls. It was purely a shoshing in the spiritual field. It started when the books landed on earth and humans started to shoshing. The first step of solidifying their souls was always the same method. It was concluded and measured by countless pioneers, and the method was proven to be the most effective and had the highest success rate. Since words were the only physical form of thoughts, then in order to use the ancestors' thoughts to help them transfer mind into strength, words were the perfect bridge to connect the two. Since this method was used throughout the human word, the 49 books mentioned in the Purification were obviously recognized by everyone as the most helpful books to solidify one's soul. It began from 1582 when the tradition created the index, and it wasn't changed since then. Chen Changsheng walked around the bookshelves and searched. Although he was familiar with the order of the books, it still took him an hour to find all of the 49 books and move them to the floor beside the window. Then he placed them in order. He didn't start reading immediately. Instead he went to the street of Hundred Blossom and ate at a restaurant. Then he rested around the lake's grassfield for an hour. After satisfied by his relaxation, he returned to the library once again and picked up the first book and began reading. Previously, when he was finding the books, he checked the titles and made sure he never read these books. Although he was a bit disappointed, he was curious as well. What were the content of these books that they can help humans solidify their souls? The first books that he picked up was Discussion of Pooh Men. He was sure that he never read the book. When he opened the book and saw the familiar contents upon it, he thought he was seeing illusions similar to the entrance test of the Heavenly Academy. Although this book was very thin, it felt heavy in his hands. He looked at the sentences in the books confused and discovered something with surprise. He had already read these materials when he was 4 years old, more precisely, he has already memorized this book entirely. Except this book was named The Scripture of Pooh. Editor Bingo. Yo, this guy. Be going against his Shishou's teachings and started to shushing, he was for sure a little surprised. It felt as if he returned to the testing field of the Heavenly Academy. He always thought this type of good thing won't happen again, but out of chance it occurred once more. It took him a while for him to return to his senses. After returning from his daydream, he quickly opened the second book. This book's name was Collection of Mausoleum of Knowledge. He flipped through the pages as if a strong gale had blew open the book. He quickly realized that he had also read this book as well. The praises written by past poets for the Mausoleum of Knowledge were all in his head. Except when he first read these poems when he was 5 years old in the old temple of Xining village, this collection was named Index of Fancy Poems. Chen Chongsheng remained silent for a while and flipped open the third book. Still the same. He read this book as well, except the title was different when he read it while he was young. The fourth book, the fifth book. He quickly scanned through the 49 books for once and knew that he read all of these books. Just like this. This is a surprise. Chen Chongsheng picked up the Purification once again and fell silent. He thought silently, but the corners of his lip raised a little. His closed his eyes, but happiness filled his heart. He remembered the words that Shuang Er said when she left. Xiuxing is never simple. He raised his head and looked outside of the window. The sunlight had scattered outside of the door. Although the wind is still blowing, there was no sign of anyone around. Chen Chongsheng was a little disappointed. If that girl was still here, he really wanted to tell her that he may have a chance to solidify his soul faster than her lady. But he thought again, Su Yurong finished the 49 books 100 times to reveal its meaning. She successfully solidified her soul when she was only 4 years old. The little self-pride that appeared in Chen Chongsheng's heart quickly dissolved. He thought it was meaningless. The next thing that he needed to do was to use the ways recorded on the Purification, and use the words carved in his head from the 49 books and transform the power of the words into fertilizers that can strengthen his mind. Then once and for all he will be able to solidify his soul. If it was anyone else in this kind of critical moment, they will continue this process until they succeed. But Chen Chongsheng looked at the sun and noticed it has already moved westward and dawn was here. He put down Purification and collected the books on the floor. Then he walked out of the library. Bvec, it was time for dinner. Since he needed to eat dinner, he ignored the chance to change his life. If this is self-discipline, then this self-discipline was too strict and harsh. It was almost to the point of self-harming. But it could also be viewed as self-confidence because he believed that chance wouldn't slip away. From the entrance exam of the Heavenly Academy to these 49 books, Chen Chongsheng already noticed some things. His master has already built the basic and the road for Xiuxing. His master for sure wasn't just a regular Taoist. The way of Xiuxing was long and distant, but his senior in him read the entire scroll of the way when they were young and memorized countless literatures in their heads. This meant that he has already made his first step way before anyone else. He has already traveled 10,000 miles on the way of Shou-Xing, then of course he was able to arrive at the destination earlier than anyone else. Chen Changsheng was always confident in himself, but upon realizing this he grew more confident. By now the night has slowly approached the capital and the sun was slowly setting in the horizon, but in his open heart, another red sun was slowly rising. Why would he be afraid of the darkness ahead? After finishing his dinner, he returned once again to the library and boiled a pot of water. Then he made a cup of tea he bought in the street of Hundred Blossom. He sat on the ground and meditated for a long time. His eyes skimmed through the 49 books that were lined up perfectly and finally stopped at the purification. The words in the books slowly raised in his head. The contents returned from his childhood memory and became extremely clear. Then slowly they released a certain presence that followed the path that was mentioned in the first chapter of the purification and continuously traveled in his mental world. Many years ago in the old temple, he had already opened his mind. The only thing he needed to do now was to solidify his soul. He closed his eyes and thought quietly, but gradually he forgot to think. To clear one's mind and see one's soul wasn't that difficult. It just requires practice. Time slowly went by and frogs started to make noise in the wetland outside of the library. It was still early spring. The night darkened and the stars brightened. The capital was still full of noise. But the classical teaching was still quiet with its only resident inside. The oil lamp inside the library was dim, but it seemed to never fade. Suddenly, a light ring was heard in the building. A breath of wind circled around the structure. Chen Changxing opened his eyes and confusion filled his pupils, but slowly it turned into calmness. Then finally they were filled with happiness. He successfully solidified his soul in the time of 1 day and 1 night. Shou-Xing is just this simple. Editor Bingo. I lied, he is too op. He be hacking. His Shou be the biggest hacker in the whole book, I bet. Chapter 23, The Sea of Stars. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Changxing successfully went on the path of Shou-Xing and no obstacles had appeared so far. If others knew about this, they would definitely feel confused. He himself did not feel anything himself, especially after he confirmed the meaning behind his master making him reciting the 3,000 scrolls of Wei. Of course, after all this was a happy thing. If he could solidify his spirit, then he could choose a star. If he could choose a star, then he could absorb starlights and purify. If he could purify, then he could meditate and self-observe. If he could meditate and self-observe, then he could reach heart-seeking and understand the rules behind the nature. If he could reach heart-seeking, then he could fuse the starlights onto his body and become immune to the diseases. If he could reach star-fusing, then he could become a saint and eventually deity, jumping out of fate, or at that time he no longer needed to change his fate anymore. Yes, to Chen Changxing the goal to Shou-Xing was always clear and it never changed. Maybe on the path of Shou-Xing he could pursue something else, such as seeing some beauties that common people couldn't see, experience some feelings that common people couldn't experience, or return the humiliations he had back to those people that humiliated him, but these were all not important. What was truly important was the final goal. He just solidified his spirit. He did not even complete the first step to Shou-Xing. He already began to think about the deification stage that only existed in the legend. Even Chen Changxing knew that he was dreaming of something that was so far out of reach. If he told someone his dream, he would easily get laughed at, but at least he would never tell others about it. In comparison to people his age, Chen Changxing was relatively quieter. He dealt with things in a relatively calm fashion. Because of this, people in Xining town often thought he was 3 or 4 years older than what he actually was. He understood clearly. He could solidify his spirit successfully in 1 day and night. The most important reason was his master built up a good basis for him since youth and had prepared him well, but this definitely did not mean he surpassed the true geniuses like Su Yurong. The second day morning he still woke up at 5. He cleaned up and began eating his breakfast. What happened yesterday did not have any influence on his daily schedule. Only his slightly tired eyes showed that he was not as calm as what he appeared to be. He did not have a good sleep last night, not because there were still a smell in the small building but because he was truly happy. The Tradition Academy was still crowded. The workers were at the main building fixing and cleaning up. The library was still quiet. Because of his request, nobody came to bother him. Xiu Xing. Purification was the first stage of Xiu Xing. It could be separated into 3 steps. The first step was solidifying one's spirit, but also the premise of all. The second step was to find his destined star. This sounded like a very mysterious step, but Chen Changxing did not really worry. What he was really worried about was the third step: absorb starlights onto his body and purify them. Until then, he would finally ascertain what impacts would the issues in his body cause. The so-called Xiu Xing was to borrow the world's power. After the books came to the world, humans began to Xiu Xing. They developed countless Xiu Xing methods. They tried infinitive ways. Some Xiu Xing methods absorbed fire, some were close to nature to absorb the power of fields, and eventually the tradition was established. Because of humans' infinitive years of experiments, humans' Xiu Xing gradually started to absorb power from the stars. The high-temperature magma in the volcanoes could be converted to the qi in the human body, helping Xiu Xingists to become really strong. The power in the fields could also be used by the Xiu Xingists, but all of these energy sources were not as good as stars. The stars were in the sky. Their locations never changed, continuously shining on the continent. People who lived on the ground only needed to look up to see the infinitive starlights. Since their youth, the stars had been silently accompanying them. To the continent and people living on it, star is light, is direction, is energy, and is time. Because of its permanency, humans eventually chose to convert starlights into qi. It was not largely related to these literal descriptions. The main reason to use starlight was because starlights were the purest energy source in the world. It contained no impurities and they were more mild than sunlights, magma, etc. The Yao race could also absorb starlights. Moreover, they had a different body system, so they did not need any Xiu Xing methods. They could directly absorb the starlights into their body and convert it into their own power. Because of this, any Yao race who could transform into human form always had huge amount of power. In comparison to Yao, humans could not directly absorb starlights. In another word, directly absorbing starlights was inefficient for them. Therefore, humans creatively created a Xiu Xing method, and starting from that day humans began the road to dominate the world. Light up the destined star. At night there were infinitive amount of stars in the sky. It is as vast as the ocean. Its number was much bigger than the human population. If a human Xiu Xingist wanted to purify, he had to find the star out of the trillion stars in the sky that belonged to him. That star would then be his destined star. No one could explain the principle behind the destined star. Why was there an unbreakable connection between that star and you? Why could the star respond to humans from infinitive miles away? Even the greatest scholar in the history of the tradition could not explain this phenomenon. Everyone had his own star. However, only the people who successfully solidified their spirit could find the star that belonged to him and form an unexplainable connection. Eventually he would use his spirit to light up the star. There were infinitive stars in the night sky. As long as you could emit your spirit, then you could find your star. Such connection was like many other relations, absolutely repulsive to others. As long as you establish a connection with your destined star, no one could rob it. Then a problem rose: what kind of star was most suitable to be the Xiu Xingist's destined star? There was basically an agreement on the continent. The farther the destined star, the better. Because infinitive generations of scholars in the tradition tracked countless Xiao Xingists and investigated them, after collecting countless data and doing infinitive analysis, they ascertained that this theory was absolutely correct. But why? If Xiao Xingists directly absorb the destined star's energy, shouldn't the star be the closer the better? In order to explain this phenomenon, the scholars of the tradition built a model through reverse engineering based the reality. In this model, Xiao Xingists did not directly absorb the destined star's energy but rather used the night sky as a wall. To light up the destined star was like hammering a snag on this wall. This would be a line tied between him and the night sky. Eventually using this line would swing back and forward. When that happens, the Xiao Xingist would be absorbing the starlight energy flowing in the night sky. In this model, that shapeless line was like a wet cotton thread. The starlights in the night sky were like catkins that floated in the air during the spring. As the thread slowly swings in the spring wind, more and more catkins would stick it to. Eventually it would fall into the man who was holding the thread. If that thread was long enough, connecting from the tallest building in the royal palace to the top of the mausoleum of the books, then it could even wipe out all the catkins in the entire capital. Editor Bing. Okay, if you are like me who didn't understand a single thing the theory was saying, I will simplify it for you guys. Basically you connect yourself to the star with a line. This line is the thing that will absorb or catch chi in space. So if you have a longer line, then that means you will be able to absorb more chi. In order to have a longer line, you have to be connected to a farther star. So this is the theory behind why a further star is better than a closer one. Don't fret guys if you didn't understand anything of that. Because I didn't understand anything until I asked my friends to put it in simple English. XD, the scholar in the demon race, Tong Gu Si once proposed a harsh criticism to the theory from the tradition. He thought this was an entirely non-economical and a completely fake deduction. To this, the Pope at that time relentlessly rebutted. He said, only the established deduction could be the deduction closest to the truth. Next, the demon race scholar sent a letter to the entire continent. He asked in the letter, after all, where is that line? If there was truly a line between the Xiao Xingists and the destined star, then the tradition's theory could be established. Because through observing the nature, it could be easily seen that the longer the line, the larger the amplitude. Therefore the energy produced was larger, like the previous catkin example. The problem was, no one had actually seen that line. The Pope answered concisely to this question in the capital. Since there is connection between the destined star and Xiao Xingist, then there must be a line between the two. We cannot see and touch doesn't mean it's non-existent. The demon race scholar Tong Gu Si then sent another letter to the entire continent. Intangible things have no impact on this objective world. Then whether or not this line exists or not has no meaning to us. Then it should be non-existent. To this comment the Pope pondered for several months. Then he created the most famous answer. The line is fate. Yes. The unexplainable connection was fate. The stars in the night sky reflected people's fate. No one had taught Qin Chongsheng how to choose a destined star. His master must have known, but he never taught it. Of course, he remembered the sentence that Pope said. The 3,000 scrolls of Wei definitely had this famous story. Since the relation between human and their destined stars was fate, he appeared to be very cautious. After all, after he was 10, the word fate was what he cared about the most in the world. From morning to sunset, he had been trying to be familiar with the emission process of the spirit. He did not know after the incident when he was 10, how much spirit he still had, but what made him content was, his emission process of spirit was not very different from what's written on the texts. He closed his eyes. He let his spirit leave his sea of spirit and flow into the silent library. Even though he did not look, the surrounding faintly appeared in his brain. It was somewhat blurry, the lights were somewhat illusioned, and it was a completely new vision. After night arrived, unlike other beginners who would still wallow in spirit sensation to the environment, he did not linger for any longer. He unhesitatingly drove past the window with his spirit, flying towards the sky. He flew higher and higher, passing through the bird's thinnest feather, passing through the tiniest water particle in cloud, passing through the coldest flow of wind, and finally arrived between the infinitive bright spots. That's the Sea of Stars. Chapter 24, Trillions of Stars, Only One Destiny. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The stars filled the sky and its light emitted and shined on earth. They contained enormous amount of energy and countless thin and mysterious waves around them. Is this the so-called destiny? Chen Changsheng's soul flew to a higher place and traveled past countless stars. Comparing to the vast space around him and the enormous energy held in the stars, his soul was so fragile and tiny. It was like a feather in a tornado and a raindrop in a desert. It seemed like it would be torn apart in the next moment and vaporized in the next second. But interestingly, none of the stars nor its energy harmed his soul in any way. There appeared to be a red star directly left of him. The surface of the star was burning violently and breathed fire around it. He didn't know how far that star was, but he knew it was extremely distant. However, that star appeared to be so close to his soul, which meant that this star was gigantic and could fill up his entire sensory space. The burning red star was breathing an unlimited amount of energy in space and gave off a terrifying feeling. It seemed that if anyone got close to it, they would be burned into the purest energy. But it also attracts them and made them want to be melted and merge with it. Chen Changsheng was a little insecure, but it was not due to fear. He knew that nothing in the Sea of Star would harm human soul. This kind of insecurity was generated from the star's characteristic and contradiction between their presence. In other words, he didn't like it. Therefore his soul continued to travel to farther locations. After surpassing a misty object, a blue star appeared in front of him. That star seemed to be lonely and extremely cold. Its surface was covered with frost and gave him a sense of rejection. His soul floated around there for a moment and traveled further. There obviously was a limit for Xiaoxingist's soul to travel outside of their body. As they proceed to stronger stages, this limit grows. But only after they light up their destined star would the limit be removed. This is one of the unsolved mystery of Xiuxing. Chen Changsheng's soul continued to float upward and saw different stars and views. He traveled past a few quiet stars. Whenever his soul tried to approach them, it would be pushed out by an unseen force. He realized that those were the destined stars of others. As he went further into the depths of the universe, the number of stars increased. Gradually there appeared many weird and strange stars. Some stars floats in the space and continuous shooting out starlight. Some seemed to grow arms out of them. Others looked like a child's toy. Some stars had bright wings like a magical bird and some gave off a presence of a beast. For an entire night, Chen Changsheng's soul floated in the Sea of Star. This situation was common in the human world, especially in the capital where countless powerful Xiaoxingists reside. Every night many people tried to light up their destined star, therefore no one noticed Chen Changsheng's soul. Suddenly for a moment his soul saw an extremely bright ray. It was different from the light emitted by the stars. It was more intense and thicker. He wanted to go and take a clearer look at it, but he faintly remembered something. He knew it was time to go back. Editor Bing. How much of a cliffhanger can you be, damn it, Chen Changsheng? And damn it, Mao and I. He opened his eyes and woke up. He realized that he was still sitting in the library of the classical teaching. Although it took him a while for his soul to travel to the depths of the Sea of Stars, it only took a moment for it to come back. He looked outside and noticed that the sky has brightened up. It was already morning. In the past 14 years, Chen Changsheng's daily schedule was disrupted for the first time. During the day he slept a little. When night came he went to the library and continued his trip to the Sea of Stars. On the second journey, he had more experience and was also more familiar with the Sea of Stars in the night sky. He did not take a close look at the beginning sections of the Sea of Stars, but flew directly into the deeper regions. He wanted to see where he could travel to. When the dawn was about to come, the suddenly brightened light woke him up again. On the third night, he repeated this process. The fourth day, the fifth day, and every night he would use his spirit to travel farther and see more stars, but he still did not have the thought to stop going farther. The path of Xiu Xing was long and far. He thought he should always try his best to travel farther. On the sixth day, his spirit traveled to a place where he never reached. What he didn't know was, extremely few people's spirits could travel this far. One part might due to the strength of spirit. Another part was because the Sea of Stars he previously passed was seductive enough to capture the Xiu Xingists. Most people couldn't suppress their desire and lit up the destined star and begin purification right away. Looking from this angle, his resistance to seduction was indeed strong. That's only because he understood more clearly than anyone else what was truly seductive while living on this world. But he quickly realized that rarely any spirit came here because his spirit traveled for a long time here. It was unlike the past 5 nights where most of the stars were lit up by others already. Everywhere he looked the things he saw were new. The space was new, the stars were new. They were all waiting for him to choose any star. Chen Changsheng's spirit still didn't stop. Because he felt that he could still go farther and see more, he continued on. On the 7th night, his spirit finally encountered an interference or met a wall. That's a shapeless, invisible, or even non-existent wall. He knew the wall was there, but he felt hesitant for the first time. What's beyond the shapeless wall? He didn't know about this shapeless wall. Was it the crystal wall that separates the space? Of course he also didn't know, only the strongest creature such as Golden Dragon could pass through easily, but he could guess that this shapeless wall should be hard to pass. Yet he still wanted to try. If this was an unbreakable wall, he already came to the edge. He would be satisfied only after bumping his head with it. He wanted to try, so he tried. He didn't have any hope, but surprisingly, his spirit easily passed through. Over there was still a sea of stars. However, in comparison to the sea of stars he traveled before, his spirit actually felt more familiar with the sea here. It was as if he came back to his homeland. His spirit continued flying up. As he did, he became more and more light. Even in the empty stage, he knew that the connection between his spirit and his body was getting weaker and weaker. Maybe in any moment now it would break. Then the light became darker, the number of stars gradually decreased. Chen Changsheng could feel that this was the farthest he could travel. Farther ahead there faintly lied another sea of stars, like lights of 10,000 families. He looked there and felt a little unfortunate, but he knew it was time for him to make a choice. His spirit spread out to the surrounding, attempting to find the star belonged to him. Choosing the destined star to every Xiu Xingist was a hard question because there were too many to choose from. There was no rule. You could choose because you liked the color, or you could just close eyes and randomly pick one. Chen Changsheng did not encounter such problem. Because when he wanted to choose, the star appeared in front of him. In one glance he began to love this star, so he decided to make him his destined star. It was a red small star, in comparison to the one he saw in the beginning. It was obviously much smaller. On its surface there weren't any terrifying burning fire. All the lights and energy seemed to be hidden in the deepest part of the star. That red star was very round. Its surface was very smooth. It looked like a little apple. It was very cute, very pretty, and made people want to be close to it. It also made people want to take a bite out of it. As Chen Changsheng thought so, his spirit flew there. The night breezes blew softly and the frogs had already stopped making noise. Nothing but silence surrounded the library of the classical teaching. Chen Changsheng sat on the clean ground and closed his eyes. Calmness was the only expression on his face. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and closed it like he took a bite out of something. Faintly it could be heard, the sound of him swallowing from his throat. Suddenly he started sweating and moisturized the floor beneath him. At the end of the distant star sky, a red star lit up. He opened his eyes and looked into the depths of the sky. He couldn't see that star, but he could feel it. Because, that was his star. Just like the great demon scholar Tong Gu Si said, no one could see that string. Therefore when Chen Changsheng successfully light up his destined star, there were no odd phenomenon that occurred in the classical teaching. There was no holy light that appeared in the night sky of the capital. This continent was just like usual, quiet and peaceful. Plus his star was so far away from the surface of the earth. Although it showed a moment of brightness, it still couldn't be seen. Yes, that star was too far. So far that the priests of the star observation platform didn't even notice it. But it was seen by someone. Because the Divine Queen was viewing the stars. It was entirely out of chance. If the weather was nice, the Divine Queen herself would view the stars on her balcony. There was a little rain today, therefore she came out a little late. Somehow she saw the entire duration of that star bin light up. But even she couldn't have known who light up that star. Is that person in the capital or in the south? Or in the Shuelao city? The Divine Queen looked deeply into the night sky and raised her dark eyebrows. Her voice contained no emotion. Interesting. Chapter 25, Do Platform and Herb Garden. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lady Mou, TLA. Or Mo Yen mentioned earlier in the story, the author has officially changed her name at this point because he liked this one better, had long eyelashes. Due to the previous drizzle, tiny water drops hang from the tips of her eyelashes. This made her seem very beautiful. Too bad after hearing the Divine Queen speak, she blinked and that raindrop fell down into darkness of the night in the dew platform. The dew platform was right in front of the royal palace and was several hundred feet tall. It was built purely out of bronze and was surely a majestic structure. There were thousands of night pearls decorated on the platform. Their light could be seen from even dozens of miles away, but tonight these night pearls didn't emit any light. Mou glanced towards the edge of the dew platform. The black goat was standing there as well and raised its head to stare at a certain direction in the night sky. Mo Yen looked back at the center of the dew platform and reassured that the Divine Queen was also looking in the same direction in the night sky. She was fairly confused. Your Majesty, what are you looking at? She asked. Lady Mou was respected throughout the Zhou dynasty or even by the entire continent. This respect was not only due to her background and her strength but also to her close relationship with the Divine Queen. There were less and less people who could talk casually with the Divine Queen in the world now. Starlight shone upon the dew platform. Only the woman's back could be clearly seen. It was just a simple back image, but it seemed like the representation of this universe. This is because she was the first female emperor of this world. She was the master of Zhou dynasty. Someone has lit up a star. The Divine Queen turned around and said indifferently. Lady Mou was silent. Every night there were Xiu Xingists lighting up their destined star, but even the Divine Queen can't see them. But today she saw it and stared at it for so long. What did this represent? That star is extremely distant from us. Hearing the Divine Queen's next sentence, Mou thought she understood. She thought for a while and said, even if it's further. It doesn't always represent a true genius. The Divine Queen didn't speak. Mou acted like a little girl who was ignored by her elders and hummed. The boy of the family of Qiu Shan lit up his destined star when he was 4 years old. That star was the Dragon Star. Its distance could be ranked among the top 10 in the recent 100 years, but just that same night a small faction's apprentice also started purification and his destined star was even further away from the Dragon Star. But does this mean that he could compete with the one of the family of Qiu Shan? Purification is still determined by the strength of one's body, veins, and bones. How can a regular person match with one of the dragon's bloodline? This was a valid example. Qiu Shanjun was the champion of the honor roll of Green Cloud before he was 18 years old. He was a genius recognized by the entire world. But that apprentice from the small faction was already lost in the crowd. No one remembered him except a person as knowledgeable as Mou. The Divine Queen explained. The person who light up his destined star today was unique. The strength of his soul and the calmness of his spirit rarely exists in this world. I believe it was an elder who studied for over a century and suddenly understood the way. He was just like Wang Ji-su from back then. They both endured the test of time and finally released their potential. Mou replied, during the night when Sir Ji-su light up his star, the entire capital sensed his presence. How could it be compared with tonight? Plus there were no shadow of the star being projected onto the ground, which means that it wasn't the power of a special bloodline. Even if he has potential, I'm afraid it would be limited as well. The Divine Queen didn't turn back, but it was clear she was smiling. You are just a child. What do you know about Xiuxing? Although Mou was young, she was already a great Xiuzingist of Star Fusion stage. Both of the Zhou dynasty and the southern Xiuxing factions viewed her with regard. Even the Pope himself liked to compliment her. However, in the eyes of the Divine Queen, she was still a child who knew nothing about Xiuxing. How many people in this entire continent has the right to say this? The Divine Queen was obviously one of them. Therefore Mou wasn't angry. She just stuck her tongue out toward the back of the Divine Queen. She wasn't a little kid anymore, but she could still be innocent because the person she was facing was the Divine Queen. The Divine Queen knew she was fooling around at her back, but she smiled and stayed silent. Mou walked up beside her and looked at the vast sky and the stars. After viewing for a long time she suddenly asked. Your Majesty, the destined star, does it truly represent each and every one of our fate? Then can we see the future of our destiny? The Divine Queen replied, it could be interpreted as something else besides our destiny. Mou asked curiously, what is the other interpretation? The Divine Queen looked deeply into the night sky and fell silent for a long time. There used to be a distant star and it shined for a moment, but it couldn't be seen anymore. The Divine Queen spoke, perhaps. They are our destined doom. Chen Changsheng had lit up his destined star. There were only a handful of people who had the chance to witness that moment. Due to that invisible crystal wall, those people miscalculated the distance between that star and the surface of the earth. But even then, this distance could be ranked among the top in the human history. The Xuelao city of the northern demon race, the mountain virgin of the south, the mountain Li of the longevity sect, and the forgotten valley of the kingdom of Yao. Perhaps there were people who saw it, or perhaps they didn't. But if they did, they would treat this with great regard and try to discover the identity of the person who light up that star. But this was unimportant. There were billions upon billions of stars in the night sky and they contained countless relationships and strings with humans. It was a world of unpredictability. No one, not even Chen Changsheng, could ever see that string. If even Chen Changsheng said nothing, then no one could know it was him. But there were always accidents, or you can say exceptions. Some people's level of Xiuxing wasn't exactly high. Speaking logically, they couldn't even see the image of the destined star that was light up and talk less of following that string to track Chen Changsheng down. But perhaps it was fate. The moment Chen Changsheng light up his destined star, that person was also looking at the night sky just like the Divine Queen. Perhaps also out of fate, she was also Xiuxinging at that time and she released her soul into the ruined garden. But the most important reason was that she had a special ability that made her close with the star. She could instinctively discover many things. That it was a talent, or to be precise, it was her racial ability. On the other side of the broken walls of the classical teaching was the herb garden. She was in the herb garden that night. She could clearly sense the calmness and endurance of the soul that light up that destined star. She was curious of who the owner of that soul was. She wanted to find him and ask him some questions. For this purpose, she didn't mind gifting him some precious treasures that were rarely found in the world. Because her name was Luo Luo, and she was generous. Chapter 26, Accumulation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If Chen Changsheng started to directly absorb starlight into his body and started to purify his body, the girl who was spiritually in the herb garden, one wall away from the Tradition Academy, could have used her inborn talent to track the remaining sensation to discover Chen Changsheng's location. Also, if his sweat that gathered on the floor did not strangely disappear along the wind or become invisible as it permeated on the floor, she might have been able to find him. The problem was, at this moment Chen Changsheng again showed a personality different from common people. He unhesitantly resisted his temptation to achieve purification and directly went back to the small building. He took a shower and then went to sleep. The floor that he sat on did not have a single drop of sweat. On the second day, Chen Changsheng deeply reread the purification, especially the last part about absorbing starlights to purify the body. He even made annotations to understand it more thoroughly. After ensuring that he understood the contents completely, he went to the grassland next to the lake and took a rest until the sun lowered beneath the city wall. When night came, he ensured that his body and mentality were in good condition. He then opened up the library and started the purification. His spirit spread out in air, but it did not pass through the library's roof and go into the sky. He knew he had already established a connection between the distant red star and himself. But the feeling was not real. To be accurate, the connection between the star and him did not leave any trace in his body nor in his mentality. He was very certain that the star was there and no one could snatch it away. Like what that Pope said that year. The line was actually there. Chen Changsheng closed his eyes, calmed his mind, opened up his soul, and followed the method of purification. He entered into an empty and absolutely relaxed state. Then he quietly waited for the starlights to solidify and come to him along that line. Time gradually elapsed. The wind in night sometimes softened and sometimes solidified. The forest outside of the library was completely silent. Yesterday the workers from the Department of Traditional Education came and did some cleaning. Many branches were cut down and those broken branches were left on the ground. The scent of trees were sent far away by the night wind. The reason why the scent of trees were strong was because of the transparent jelly-like material flowing outside, which was sap. The Tradition Academy had a variety of trees including fruit trees, which made the area smell nice. There was a very thick pagoda tree. Its branches that were near the ground were all chopped off. One of the broken parts looked like a scar. There were already a lot of tree jelly, and as the wind blew, the saps flowed down the branches slowly. If the people who enjoy killing saw this image, they would feel that the pagoda tree's arms was cut off and that blood was spilling out. However, under the silver starlight the flowing sap was more like sweet honey. After a really long while, the honey-like sap finally fell to the ground upon a patch of grass. For the lack of a better word, it luckily, or rather brutally, made an insect into the primary form of amber, which meant that it would eventually be another insect's food. A similar scene happened in the library too. Infinite amount of starlights fell on that shapeless but also insensible line. The starlights solidified the line into a slightly dense essence. It then followed along the line and slowly fell to the ground. It is unsure of how far the starlights traveled, but they went through the roof of the library and landed on Chen Changsheng's body. The starlights were soft and the skin of Chen Changsheng's face became jade-like. But one moment later, the starlights, like sand and wind passing through his fingers, penetrated his body and could no longer be seen. Even so, his face was just like it was before, as if nothing had happened. As time passed, more and more starlights continued to fall on him. These starlights seemed to have the ability to ignore all obstacles. They easily passed through his clothes, fell on the surface of his body, and went deep into his body. Their destination was unknown. Chen Chongsheng closed his eyes. He did not see any of these images and did not know what had happened. Not until the sun had fully risen over the capital and the chicken had started to tweet did he finally wake up. He was somewhat excited. In the last 14 years, he was rarely this excited. Because if he purified successfully, then he would step on the path of Shou-Xing. With this, regardless of whether or not he could get first place at the great trial, he would get some voice to his fate. Such thoughts are not good for the body, he said soundlessly to himself. Because he had an extremely mature attitude for his age, he was able to calm himself down quickly. Then he looked at his hands. His feelings slightly changed and his eyes were filled with confusion and bewilderment. His hands did not change at all and were as clean as last night. He took out a little round mirror and looked at his face in the mirror. Then he put down his little round mirror, pulled up his collar, and looked at his body. He found out that nothing had changed and he was just as clean as he was in the past years. A successful purification should be like this. According to the saying in the purification, when humans lived, ate, drank, breathed, and absorbed nutrients, they also took the dirty qi in the world into their body. Therefore they had to absorb starlights into their body. Then they would use the star's purest and softest power to completely expel the dirty qi in their bodies. However, Chen Chongsheng's body did not have any change. Because of his mysophobia, he loved to stay clean. But now he actually desired to see dirty and stinky black oils on his body. He felt that the oils provided him with evidence that the dirty qi inside his body were excreted out. Chen Chongsheng looked at the rising sun outside and remained silent for a really long time. Suddenly, he put the back of his hand on the floor and rubbed against it hard. Not until he felt pain and a big red mark could be seen on the back of his hand did he stop and take a glance at his hand. He could faintly see a small blood streak and he realized that he indeed did not purify successfully. When the starlights come, it first interacted with the skin. In the beginning of the purification, his skin was strengthened. His skin did not change at all in comparison to yesterday. Chen Chongsheng remained silent. Originally he thought the problem with his broken vessels would only cause his soul to easily flow out. Later on, it would be very hard for him to convert starlights into qi and keep them inside his body. Despite this, he thought he could at least complete the purification stage. He did not know that he would not be able to purify himself. The morning light gradually brightened up. He stood up and walked out of the library. Because he sat with his legs crossed the entire night. His body felt somewhat sore. He had to walk slowly. Looking from the back, he looked like a kid who had just recovered from a fatal disease. Walking back to the small building, he saw that the water pot had already heated up on the stove. He felt a little upset. In accord with the purification, he thought that when he came back, he would definitely be dirty, so he got the hot water ready beforehand. Who could expect that he did not even have a single sweat? He thought for a while and eventually decided to take a shower. It was neither because he had sat on the floor for an entire night nor because the school was dirty. His body had a serious problem which made him curse his body. He always thought his body was somewhat dirty. He washed himself frequently. He loved to be clean and had a small degree of mysophobia. He put the hot water into the big bucket by the corner of the wall, walked inside, covered his face with a wet towel, lied on the edge of the bucket, opened up his arms, and lied backward. He was exhausted. Beneath the wet towel, he heaved an inaudible sigh. At that moment, on the other side of the wall a faint sigh could be heard. Chen Chongsheng thought sad people were actually anywhere. No one knew that Chen Chongsheng had attempted to purify. Even those who saw him lighting up his destined star didn't know. Because purification was more common than lighting up the destined star, it didn't matter if Shou-Xingists were at the purification stage or the star-fusing stage. As long as he was Shou-Xinging, then he needed to do so night by night. Moreover, the people who could see the destined stars being light up couldn't see the line. Because of this, they wouldn't know who was on the opposite end of the line. There was no limit to human self-strengthening. Purification was never a one-day thing. At night, Chen Changsheng walked into the library again and sat on the floor to continue Xiu Xing. A 14-year-old kid aroused himself again from disappointment and loss. The time taken was indeed too little. He had to appreciate all of his past experiences and the things that he would experience soon, but of course the benefits that he experienced won't be liked by others. He had no time to feel disappointed, he could only keep trying. If not succeed, then die. These 5 words were most prominent in his mind. He calmed down again and began meditation. The infinitive dense yet invisible starlight essence followed its shapeless fate. It continued to fall from the high and far night sky and land onto him like spring wind, coiling him up and not leaving. The starlights, just like it had last night, soundlessly penetrated his body and became invisible. This process continued for so long. Just before the sun rose, he woke up again. He looked closely at his hands and did not find any change. He touched his forehead and did not find a single drop of sweat. The old clothes on him were still clean. The morning wind flew in from outside and blew on his sleeves. He did not understand. Even though his body's vessels were broken, when his skin and hair had absorbed starlights, there were no changes. Where did the starlight go? He thought that the starlights had all spread into the air and transformed into nothing. He did not know. He was confident that when he closed his eyes and meditated, the starlights had passed through his black hair and his hands, had passed through his old clothes and the little sword on his waist and had quietly entered his body. There was no loss. It was like snow that passed through the wind and trees to fall onto the ground. Not a single leaf carried any snow. This was an extremely rare occurrence. Yet it actually occurred. Now, this tree still looked green and was not white at all. In actuality, the ground under the trees was being stacked with snow. This was the so-called accumulation. One day, it would eventually rise. Or explode. Chapter 27, Years had passed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 5 o'clock in the morning, Chen Changsheng opened up his eyes. He did not wake up from sleep, rather, he had woken up from meditation. Seeing that his body still did not have any changes, he shook his head and returned to the small building to shower. He laid on the edge of the wooden bucket/tub and allowed the slightly hot water to immerse his body and with it, his state of mind. He sighed and mumbled into the wet towel, "When can I find a way?" The bucket was about half a man's height. It was placed behind the wall, very close to the surface of the wall. One moment later, he heard a sigh and a distressed voice that spoke, "When can I find that person?" Chen Changsheng remembered the sigh he heard yesterday morning. He removed the wet towel from his face, turned and looked at the wall. He first saw the green ivies. The wall was very high so he could not see the landscape beyond. He couldn't see who spoke the sentence. He suspected that the voice came from a younger girl. Everyone's sadness was different, but ultimately, it was still sadness. Chen Changsheng felt pity for the girl beyond the wall, but upon remembering the situation he was in, he realized that he did not have the right to feel pity for others. The next few days were calm and peaceful. He spent every day at the library reading and he spent every night attempting to absorb starlight for purification. During the process of purification, he always closed his eyes and meditated, so he obviously wouldn't be able to know if all the starlights had already penetrated through his body, but from just looking from the outside, he knew that there was no change and that he still had not achieved Xiu Xing. Even so, he continued to diligently work at it as if the disappointing results had not influenced his mentality at all. Like his Xiu Xing endeavor, the maintenance work at the Tradition Academy progressed in a structured manner. The officer, XIN from the Department of Traditional Education, did not stand in the front and preside over. There was no shortage in pay, in fact, the workers were paid on schedule. The workers obviously did not dare to slack. Since the old and broken wall could not even block off sound, it obviously could not block off wind. The news of the fixing of the Tradition Academy quickly spread in capital. The fact that there was a student in the Tradition Academy gradually became known to the people. Yet because people only dared to talk privately about the actual reason for the fall of the Tradition Academy and did not dare to inquire the information, the subject offered only a little to chats at dining tables. Chen Chongsheng did not know the outside world was dimly accumulating wind and rain. He was silently attempting to achieve Xiu Xing in the school at the end of the 100 Blossom Street. He repeated the same life over and over but did not feel bored about such a life at all. Looking from the surface, he seemed to already be not concerned about whether or not the purification was successful. But in actuality, his entire heart was focused on the task of achieving Xiu Xing. He had not cleaned the floor of the library for several days. To someone like him, this was very rare. This was the proof. Just because purification was not successful, didn't mean he had not gained anything from the process. He read many books in the library. He read most of them when he was at the Xining town. Some of the books about Xiu Xing was his first time reading. After comparing what he was reading now to what he read before, he was surprised to find that since his youth, most of the books he read were related to Xiu Xing. When he was memorizing the scrolls of Wei, he did not know what the elusive words meant. When he asked his senior or master, he still could not get a specific answer, so he perceived what he read literally instead of really thinking closely. Upon coming to the capital and seeing all the entrance books to Xiu Xing such as Purification at the Tradition Academy, he realized that all the Xiu Xing methods, all the precious experiences left by the previous elites and all the methods owned by the big sects or even some of the secret methods that belonged to the demons were all in the 3,000 scrolls of Wei at the old temple in Xining. What did this mean? Who said he did not know how to Xiu Xing? He previously thought that he just didn't start Xiu Xing yet. Now, he knew that this sentence was also wrong. Who said he did not start Xiu Xing yet? No, when he learned how to speak, he was already Xiu Xing. The 3,000 scrolls of Wei at the old temple in Xining were infinitive knowledge fragments related to Xiu Xing. Before, in his mental world, there was a big fog. Now the Xiu Xing methods he understood were extremely tiny dirt. They became the core of the fog and so, the gas particle began to liquefy to form a heavy rain. Chen Chongsheng entered a very strange status or trip. It could be described as comprehend by analogy or enlightenment. It was as if someone gave him a sharp warning. The most accurate way to describe this is the word accumulation. Like a pot of power lit up by a spark. Inside Chen Chongsheng's mental world, there was a big explosion. He was greedily reading all the books in the library and understanding the rules in Xiu Xing, so that he could reassemble the information fragments he got from the scrolls of Wei in Xining. He started reviewing until he actually understood them. He was comprehending the secrets in the Xiu Xing world at an unimaginable speed. He also learned all the details of Xiu Xing methods. With respect to knowledge about Xiu Xing alone, there weren't many people that were more knowledgeable than him. The fact that he was unable to successfully purify his body but was able to nevertheless learn so much was surprising and consoling to Chen Chongsheng. After his feeling was calmed down, he developed a lot of confusions and worries. He walked to the window of the library, looked at the direction of Xining and thought silently. The scrolls of Wei in that old temple were common things, but obviously, his master wasn't a commoner. His master had helped him establish such a stable Xiu Xing basis, yet why did he not teach him how to Xiu Xing directly? Why did he have to first come to the capital? Was it because the disease in his body was hard to cure, so he wanted him to come here and see if there were opportunities? Time elapsed quickly. In a blink, more than 10 days had passed. People from Dongyu General's mansion never appeared again. The little girl named Shuang Er also did not come. His calm life was not interrupted, which made him very happy. However, Tang 36 also did not show up, which made him very unhappy. He had left his address at the inn thinking that the opponent should be able to find him. That kid was probably shinging diligently at the Heavenly Academy. There was only Chen Chongsheng in the classical teaching, the school belonged to no one but him. He quietly read and silently attempted to achieve Xing gradually. He forgot about the outside world and the outside world also forgot about him. Sometimes he becomes envious when he remembers the chatting he heard from the Department of Education about the welcoming ceremony for the freshmen at the Heavenly Academy and the Star Seeker Academy. But he didn't care much. He was used to this kind of monotonous lifestyle because when he was studying at the old temple in Xining village with his senior, he could only hear his own voice. But his body still hasn't changed after reaching purification for several days. Although he didn't see any hope of succeeding, Chen Chongsheng wouldn't simply give up. However, he did become indifferent and decided that if there was still no change for the next few days, he would find some other way to achieve Xing in the books. Sometimes indifference makes people lose their boldness, but it could also make people calmer. That was the current mental status of Chen Chongsheng. It wasn't exactly his original mood, but it returned to its balance. When he looked at the dust that gathered again on the ground, his eyebrows wrinkled. He wasn't happy because he liked cleanliness. But this unhappiness was mostly targeted to himself. He felt that he got much lazier from before. He got some clean water from the well and started to rub the floor. Slowly the dusts disappeared. Chen Chongsheng sensed a faint fragrance after he cleaned a portion of the floor. The fragrance was very fragile and disappeared after a slight breeze blew through the window. After finishing his chore, Chen Chongsheng sat down freely and continued to absorb starlight to purify his body. There was nothing but silence in the Tradition Academy. He closed his eyes and meditated quietly. Slowly he became one with the environment and disregarded the surroundings. A butterfly flew into the building through the opened window and landed on the floor next to him. It was unwilling to leave. Benove calm that floor was the portion he had just cleaned up. Street of Hundred Blossom was just a common street in the capital. Of course, it used to be very famous because the classical teaching which was located at the end of this street was well known. At the same time, the herb garden at the other end of the street was also very famous. It used to be the royal garden of the previous dynasty. The most well-known rebellion in the history of Zhou dynasty also happened in the herb garden. When Emperor Taizong, who was still a prince at that time, rode from his mansion to the royal palace in haste, he was ambushed by the rest of the princes. At that moment Emperor Taizong was still in his sleeping attire. Everyone on this continent knew the ending of that rebellion. Emperor Taizong grasped the final victory and his siblings were persecuted on the spot. Several hundreds of the followers of these princes were also decapitalized. Due to this bloody and shady history, herb garden was abandoned by the royal family and was given to the tradition. It was used as a garden to nurture herbs and fruits. Perhaps the soils of the herb garden absorbed too much nutrients from the blood from that day, or there were too many dead bodies underground because the herbs and fruits planted here grew very well and it was recognized by the government again, and now, it's under heavy guard duty. Only a few people knew the reason why the herb garden was heavily guarded. Besides the rare herbs and fruits, some important people also come to live and visit this place. For example, when the Divine Queen was exiled for the first time from the royal palace, she exiled in this place. Due to this reason, the tradition received many benefits later on. And right now, there was another noble guest living in the herb garden. Under the old wall where the ivies dwelled, there was a stone table and a stone chair. A tea bowl was on the table and within the bowl was the precious new rain tea. A young girl was drinking tea. Her complexion was young and her pupils were like stars. Her lips were as red as roses and she had long eyelashes. There were 2 red blushes on her white cheeks. She sure was beautiful. It was a healthy kind of beauty. Just by looking at her, you would feel refreshed and contain no dirty thoughts. But the girl herself wasn't particularly happy. There was a troubled expression on her face because she was yet to find the person she was looking for. Chapter 28, She jumped over a wall and encountered a man in black robe. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The little girl was called Luo Heng. Her nickname was Luo Luo because ever since she was very young, she used to add some words that preceded her actual speech. For example, when she called for an eagle to fall on her little hand, or when she called to a crocodile to take her to the other side of the river, she would always say, "Lo lo," quickly. Luo Luo was 14 this year. She was very young and for some reason, she looked even younger than she actually was. She was immature and cute to say the least. Like her appearance, she was naive because she was born into a high position and great wealth. She did not have to worry about anything. Even after she left her homeland and came to the capital, she still hasn't changed at all. She lived in the herb garden in the capital for nearly a year. She barely interacted with others, which left her, more or less, lonely and bored. But this didn't bother her. She was only concerned about how to show Xing. In the aspect of show Xing she had some problems that she could not solve. Even her seemingly omnipotent father could not solve them, which is why she traveled 1,000 miles to the capital. She hid her identity and went to listen to some lectures in the Heavenly Academy and the Startaker Academy. She went as far as to privately ask famous professors about her situation and to discuss related questions with an honorable guest in the Great Zhou Royal Palace. Even so, she unfortunately couldn't get answers to her questions. One night, when she was at her most disappointing moment, she suddenly felt a star light up in the sky. She did not know where the star was, but because she knew that the spirit was very strong, very calm and also very different from common Xiao Xingist spirits, she could feel it because she had a very special talent. She was certain that what she sensed was real and she wanted to find that person. She wanted to put the questions that bothered her for years in front of that person and hoped to get answers. Yet after 20 days, she still couldn't find the person. Even though she sent disciples and honorable guests from the royal palace out to search, she still could not find a trace of this person. She was extremely disappointed. Luo Luo's was feeling slightly depressed. Even the well-known and rare Tsong Yu Nu tea in the cup could not grab any of her attention. Normally, she excelled in teaism. How could she ignore the fragrant tea? It was very uncharacteristic of her. Suddenly, she smelled a scent. Luo Luo opened up her eyes wide and her body became somewhat stiff. This scent was very light, but after it had entered her nose, it became intense and extremely clear, like a good wine that lures people. There were countless rare fruits in the herb garden which would give off different smells at night, but they could not hide the smell that Luo Luo picked up. In the valley that she lived in during her youth, there was a mountain of flowers. But even if they all bloomed together under the morning sunlight in the beginning of summer, it would not be as fragrant as the scent Luo Luo sensed now. She dared to swear on all the stars that she had never smelled such good fragrance in her life. This fragrance was especially light. What kind of scent was this? Where did this scent come from? When Luo Luo was thinking, she suddenly realized the scent had disappeared. Just in a second, the fragrance went away. She could no longer find a single remaining scent. She felt lost, as if she just missed a very important thing in her life. She walked to the west along the wall for several dozen steps. After she arrived at where the flowers were blooming in the ivies, she discovered that the fragrance was not from here. Subconsciously, she looked towards the green ivies on the wall. She thought the faint fragrance was coming from the other side of the wall. What's on the other side? It seemed like the discarded Tradition Academy. Compared to the herb garden lived in, the other side had been soundless, like a graveyard. Yet since a few days ago, it suddenly became noisy and crowded, as if something had just happened. Should I go to take a look? She had a feeling that the fragrance was related to the person she was trying to find. Luo Luo's hand in the wide sleeves slightly grabbed tighter. She became a bit nervous. Without turning, she looked into the darkness of night. Far away, the oil lamp that was emitting lights behind the spider plant fell into the depth of the night, became distorted and disappeared. It meant that there were people, or some kind of power existing. She knew who they were. They were her clansmen who were responsible for protecting her. But at the same time, these people also restricted her freedom. Every day, when she wanted to go to the Heavenly Academy in Startacre Academy, they had to prepare a long time beforehand, and so, they obviously wouldn't allow her to leave at night. Luo Luo saw her shadow on the wall and thought that she was so useless and was such a coward. Suddenly she laughed, shook her head, pulled out a button and then loosened her hand. The button that was made from horns of rhinoceros, fell from her little hand to the ground. Pa! One light sound came out. A fog shrouded the corner of the wall and went in and out of the green ivy. So, around 10 people came out as fast as arrows from different places in the darkness of night. The leading middle-aged man waved his hand and dispelled the fog, but he still could not see anything in the corner. These people obviously had high Xiao-Xing. They were probably even some of the best in the world. Yet now, their faces were all extraordinarily pale. They were extremely scared. One said with a shaken voice, Mississippi disappeared. The middle-aged man's face was extremely cloudy. He ordered with a low voice, report to the palace quickly. Luo Luo didn't go very far, she just went to the other side of the wall. She was confident that her people wouldn't able to find her in such a short time because the seemingly ordinary button was actually the button of 1,000 miles. The button of 1,000 miles was a magical item. It could teleport a person to a far distance. Even facing a powerful enemy, the owner could use this item to escape. However, this button was really rare and could be seen as having a second life. Even places like the Zhou Royal Palace or the Longevity Sect didn't have many of these buttons. But she just used it without much regard and she only flipped over a wall. For sure, it was a waste of such an unique item. But because of this reason, she was sure that her people would never imagine that she just used a button of 1,000 miles to travel over a wall. She should have enough time to find the origin of that fragrance. Compared to the cost of finding that person, the cost of the button of 1,000 miles was nothing to her. She was always generous. When Luo Luo moved into the herb garden half a year ago, she was curious of the Tradition Academy and the event that occurred more than 10 years ago. So, she climbed up the wall and took a peek. However, when she entered the school several months later, many things had changed. It was still quiet around here, but the wild grass around the lake was trimmed into a grass field. From the starlight, it was easy to see that the weed in the lake was also cleaned up. But the biggest change happened to the buildings. Besides the main building, which was still in ruins, other structures were mostly fixed up. The night was dark and only the library had its lights on. Luo Luo walked 2 steps towards the library. Suddenly, a light wind blew onto her face. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. A satisfied expression came to her face. She captured the leftover fragrance in the wind and with this, Luo Luo knew she had found the right place. But when she opened her eyes, her satisfied expression quickly turned into one of caution. A hint of coldness showed up in her young complexion. A person slowly walked out of the back of a tree growing around the lake. The person wore a black robe that reached up to his knees and the 2 sleeves were also long enough to touch his knees. His appearance was sharp, but his face was covered by the hoodie of the black robe which gave off a mysterious aura. Luo Luo looked at the person and smiled. Her right hand slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a button made out of bull horn. That was another button of 1,000 miles. She didn't know the identity of the person in the black robe, but it was clear that he had waited for her to appear. That was the problem. Luo Luo was taught from her childhood to not place herself in danger. In addition, she detected that the person in the black robe, especially the dark item that he held tightly in his hand, was dangerous to her. Therefore she used the second button of 1,000 miles without hesitation. She was truly generous, but she was also wasteful. She was rich enough to do that. She opened her palm and the button started to fall onto the earth. But at the same moment, the man in the black robe also opened his palm. The thing that he held in his hand seemed to be made out of iron. The 2 tips were sharp and the surface was smooth. It looked like a giant needle. The dark iron piece landed on the floor faster than the button did. Its sharp tip stabbed deeply into the soft soil. Suddenly tiny scales grew out of the smooth metal surface. The scales came off and transformed into millions of iron pieces. These pieces flew silently into the surrounding night sky. Following the iron pieces, a powerful presence rapidly covered the entire area of the Tradition Academy. The smoke screen was gone. Luo Luo was still in her original spot, and a trace of blood was flowing out of the corner of her lip. The button of 1,000 miles couldn't help her leave. She raised her head and glanced at the night sky. The starlight that was emitted seemed to reflect in a different direction. The needle-like iron weapon was powerful enough to lock down such a large space. Her smile was gone. She looked at the man dressed in the black robe and said sincerely, "A struggling heartseeker. Oh wait, I forgot. There is no such saying at your place. But it is still a struggle to get to your level. You really want to die without a trace and your family members hunted down for all their lives until not a single one left. Is it really worth it to pay this price?" This was not a threat, but rather an objective statement. That's why it was powerful. Anyone who dared to bring harm to her would face the boundless rage from the Red River of 800 miles. To do that, you first need to know my identity. The man in the black robe slowly let down his hoodie and an ordinary face was under it. It was just a middle-aged man. There was nothing special about his complexion. If he was thrown into the crowd of the capital, no one would be able to remember his face, especially when he ties up his hair. Today, he didn't put on any camouflage. His black hair went down to his shoulder. The two black demon horns were shown clearly under the starlight. This middle-aged man from the demon race said religiously without hesitation, "That if I am able to kill you in the capital of the human world, speak less of my life, I am even willing to sacrifice my soul." Chapter 29, The Sword That Lifted a Storm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The starlight was emitted from the night sky and was reflected when it passed an invisible barrier. It shined onto the face of this middle-aged male demon. It made his complexion seem even paler, as if it was the unmeltable ice from the north. Luo Luo raised her arm and wiped off the blood around the corner of her lip. She looked at him and asked, "Do you want to kidnap me or kill me?" The male demon said calmly, "I wouldn't be able to leave the capital if I kidnapped you. Sorry, I could only kill you on the spot." Luo Luo stared at his two demon horns and said, "It seems like you waited here for me for a while." The male demon bowed slightly and said, "Since you left your kingdom, or more precisely, when you passed the river of stinking blood, I have waited for this day to arrive." Luo Luo said, "Then it was quite a long time. I left my homeland several years ago, and you had started your trip for more than a year already. I hid in the capital like a rat for more than half a year. My life is to silently watch you in the darkness." It was both boring and dangerous. The male demon revealed his life that he lived these past few years. It was told in a quiet and indifferent tone, but the actual contents were terrible or even solemn. Hiding in the core of the human world for such a long time, for sure he sacrificed a lot, especially mentally. He was silent for a moment and turned around to face the northern direction of the lake. He sighed, "I miss the wind and snow of my homeland. I also miss my wife and family. Thanks to you, I have the chance to accomplish this great task tonight." After hearing this, Luo Luo's heart grew a hint of regret. She didn't know that the demon race was after her and had followed her from her home all the way to the capital. They were so dedicated to this goal that they waited such a long time for this opportunity. Now the demon race has captured the chance, it would be hard for her to escape. But the thing she was most regretful of was that she handed this chance to the demon race. If she hadn't used the button of 1,000 miles to escape the protection of her people to find the person, then this male demon could only continue hiding and waste his time in the human world until his death. She looked at the night sky and stared at the reflected starlights. She knew that the giant needle had successfully blocked out the outside world. Although her people were just on the other side of the wall, they still wouldn't be able to hear her scream. Right now, no one could save her except herself. Luo Luo assessed her current situation and grew calm. She looked at the male demon and showed a desire to fight. A heart-seeker at his peak is strong, but not strong enough. I don't think you are good enough to kill me. It's hard to live in the capital. There are too many powerful human Xiaxingists here. If I am too strong, then it would be easy to attract the attentions of those powerful Xiaxingsts. The Zhou royal palace would just need to send a few honorable guests and I would be dead, therefore I must not be strong. The male demon looked at her. My technique is specialized in the area of hiding, and so, I am not too strong nor too weak. I'm just enough to kill you, therefore I am the most suitable person for the job, which is why it is me that stands in front of you today and not another demon. Luo Luo said, I want to know your name. She said this sentence calmly, almost like she was talking down on him. My name is Mo He, the male demon answered. Luo Luo said, Mo He is just your last name. The male demon smiled a little, but his expression was a bit frightening due to his pale skin. It is meaningless for you to waste our time. Luo Luo laughed. Her laughter was high and could be heard from far away. If that barrier didn't exist, then the people on the other side of the wall would have heard it very clearly. But the male demon didn't have any intention of stopping her. I thought you didn't care if I wasted time, she said seriously. The male demon said, after killing you, it would be difficult for me to escape the capital alive. Then this short period of time would be the last moment of my 100 years of life. If I can talk with one of royal bloodline like you, I believe my soul would rest in peace. Luo Luo opened her wide eyes and her eyelashes winked. She asked curiously, you are not afraid of being discovered by humans? The male demon pointed at the iron needle in front of him. The royal palace isn't far from here. She cautioned him nicely. The male demon said expressionlessly. I am confident that even if the divine queen was looking in this direction, she wouldn't be able to see what we are doing. Okay. I am sure no one is able to save me now. Luo Luo sighed. Although she was worried, she still seemed cute. Then are you sure you can kill me? After finishing this sentence, her eyes got brighter like two night pearls. She took off a leather whip from her waist. The whip was extremely long and it stacked in piles under her feet. It's strange how she was able to keep the entire whip around her waist. Is that the legendary falling rain whip? The male demon was surprised, but it was unknown if it was due to the legendary weapon or some other reason. Then he looked at Luo Luo and said sincerely. No matter how many rare magical weapon you have around you, you must die tonight. Because this is the plan of the advisor and no accident could occur. After hearing this, Luo Luo held the whip more tightly. Her face grew paler. The Demon Advisor. It is one of the most terrifying names in this entire continent. Even her parents treated this man with extreme caution. When the Great War ended, the demon race lost terribly to the alliance formed by the humans and the Yao race. But the demons did not become extinct entirely. The demon race held their ground in the cold northern territory and seemed to prosper in the recent years. Although it had a powerful and ruthless demon emperor ruling the Shuelao city, another important reason why it prospered was that an advisor was giving order to the demon race. No matter the strange yet effective schemes or the upfront economic policies, there was always a shadow of a person behind them. Yes, the shadow belonged to the advisor. The demon advisor was a human. No one knew why would a human voluntarily betray his race to work for the demons, but the entire continent knew that this human was well respected in the demon race. Just from this point, it was clear how great this person was. The plans created by the demon advisor never failed. His mind seemed to have no weakness. His ability to manipulate the mind and others' power already surpassed the level of a master. It was an unspeakable ability. For countless years, the northern conquest started by the humans failed due to this man's schemes and plots. Some conquests even failed before the army was gathered. The loss that this man brought to the human race was greater than the loss to the 8 terrifying demon generals combined. Millions of human Xiaxianists and Yao heroes tried to find this demon advisor and assassinate him, but no one has accomplished this goal. No one has found him besides a powerful swordsman from the Longevity sect. Until this day, no one knew the name of this demon advisor, what he looked like, where he was from, and what kind of history he had that made him willing to betray his own race and work for the demons. Some rumors said that after the demon race lost in the Great War, this advisor didn't return to the Shuelao city with the demon emperor but instead chose to hide his identity and live in the human world. He could be your neighbor, your teacher, or even a priest. That was the most terrifying aspect of the demon advisor. People only knew he liked to wear a black robe. When many powerful demons mention of him, they respectfully call him Sir Black Robe. Luo Luo was looking at the demon male wearing black robe and her heart slightly sank. If this was the demon advisor's plan, then she probably had no chance of surviving. Everyone knows that the demon advisor's plans all seemed easy, even casual, but they never have any mistakes. Nothing unexpected happens. The demon male next to the tree wore a black robe. He was the advisor's direct subordinate. The iron magic weapon directly in front of him kept all the changes outside of the world. She came to the Tradition Academy by herself. No other people could see her. She obviously would die. This setup was easy, but it made perfect logical sense. She knew that she could only rely on herself to have a chance of survival. But she knew that the legendary demon advisor had accurately and precisely calculated the strength of the two sides. Like what the male demon had previously said, he was not too strong but not too weak, just strong enough to kill her. He could definitely kill her. She could see the opponent's strength and stage because of her inborn ability, but it did not mean she could beat him according to human Shoshing system. She should be in the primary meditation stage now. For her age, this stage is already quite impressive, but in a fight against adult elites, this stage was not enough for her to stay alive. At the last moment of my life, I had the pleasure to talk to such a noble princess. I feel satisfied. The demon male slowly walked toward her and slowly lifted his right hand. You could see a white light between his fingers. It was the light cluster solidified from chi. Luo Luo felt the horrifying influence coming from that light cluster. She narrowed her eyes slightly. The demon male's feet had on a pair of broken shoes. His shoes stepped on the grass and did not leave a trace. At day, the green grasses were cut short and the broken branches revealed a blithe feeling. The grasses, probably because they were cut short, actually handled the demon male's shoes. No, that's only the image of a moment. In fact, when the demon male moved his first step, his body had already began to become empty, then it disappeared. Luo Luo's eyes became more bright as if they were about to light up the darkness of night. She knew that this demon male could hide for an exceptionally long time in the human world. Like what he said himself, his Shoshing method focused on hiding, but even so, she didn't expect that the opponent would be able to disappear so easily in a fight. The next moment, the demon male appeared behind her. A terrifying fist hit her directly on the back. The demon male was much stronger than her. He was using his strongest fighting technique. He gathered all of his chi in his fist, attack with his full power. He knew that this would cause his right hand to become useless in the future, but he did not care. As long as he could kill this girl, he would give up his life and soul. Why would he even care about a hand? Luo Luo could not block the attack. In fact, she could not even trace the opponent's attack. But her whip could. She held the long whip in her right hand. Her whip jumped up like a snake, the whip tail, like a snake's tongue, darted through the darkness to stab directly into the demon male's throat behind her. At the same time, she loosened her hand, third button fell to the ground. Demon male's pale face was indifferent. He did not care at all. He continued to punch down his fist. Chi a sound camp up. A bloody hole appeared on his throat. Simultaneously, his fist also fell onto Luo Luo's back. The demons were born in mountains, their power was named out of mountain. His fist was a mountain. This mountain directly crashed into the little girl's body. The picture looked very violent. The button fell on the ground. Some fog appeared. Before it was able to spread out, Luo Luo was already turned around and was faced with a horrifying fist. Under normal situations, she should not have enough time to turn it all in front of that male demon's strange movement, but she did. Because she used another button of 1,000 miles beforehand. The button of 1,000 miles could not help her pass through that shapeless barrier, but it could at least help her turn around. But what could she do even if she turned around? That horrifying fist came closer and closer. The light of chi emitting out between the fingers became brighter and brighter. Was it because of pride that during the last moments of her life she turned to face death directly? No. Luo Luo's childish face held a firm and determined manner. She shouted and held her little fist tightly. She fearlessly swung her fist toward the fist coming toward her face. Hong! Along with a big sound. The floor was lifted up, dirts flew up and countless deep traces like spider's web appeared on the lawn. The forest that was just fixed was blown down when facing the wind. The wind softly passed by. Dirts gradually settled down to reveal bodies. The demon male stood at the original location, but his pale face had a very complicated emotion. Several lines of blood could be seen flowing down slowly. His black robe was already shredded into fragments to reveal a pale but robust body. His right fist was badly mutilated. Frightening white bones were already visible. The most horrifying wound was on his head. The demon horn on his left side was broken from the root. Blood was coming out. A yellow sharp tusk deeply nailed onto his forehead shook slightly. If this sharp tusk went in a few centimeters deeper, then he would have probably died already. The demon male wanted to pull the sharp tusk out, but for an unknown reason, he did not dare to do so. He knew that if the advisor did not give him the magic weapon to suppress the battlefield, he would be already dead from this girl's surprise attack. Thinking to this point, his face became even paler and somewhat scary. This dot was the great emperor's tusk. He looked into Luo Luo's eyes. His voice was shaking slightly. He yelled painfully and furiously, "Truly you are the legendary princess who possesses countless treasures. You actually own defensive magic weapons at such a level. After all of this, I have underestimated you. 3 buttons of 1,000 miles, a falling rain whip, and a great emperor's tusk. Every single item was a treasure that even the elites would have trouble getting a hold of. And these were all held by her. And all were used by her without hesitation. If the elites of the world saw tonight's scene, they would definitely thump their chest and stamp their feet. They would definitely feel extremely unfortunate. But she was different because she was Luo Luo. She was very generous, so she had to be generous to herself first. Moreover, these things were hers anyway. I have to admit, princess, your reaction is very good. The inborn bloodline's power is indeed strong. But unfortunately, this is a plan developed by the advisor. He must have already calculated the items you have and ascertained that those are not enough to kill me. The demon male used his hand to paint blood all over his pale face. Under the slightly twisted starlight, it made his face look strangely dreadful. He eventually said, "I am still alive. So you can please die." Luo Luo's situation was not good. The corner of her lip, which she previously used her sleeve to clean up, spilled out a streak of blood again. She looked at the demon male and lightly waved the whip. The long whip reflecting the starlight as if it came to life in the darkness. It was no longer a snake but had become a dragon. A dragon in the wind and in the rain. The falling rain whip ranked 17th on the tier of legendary weapons. The male demon disappeared and wind started blowing harshly around the library. The light emitted from the inside was like a boat surfing on a great tide. Sometimes it was dim, sometimes it was bright, sometimes it could be seen and sometimes it was gone. Luo Luo lowered her head and stood calmly. The falling rain whip in her hands kept on lashing in the night wind. Faintly raindrops started to fall. The raindrops could block the cold presence from the night sky. The wind formed a barrier to block lightning. The falling rain whip could call upon the wind and rain from all directions. It was the best weapon to protect oneself. But she was just a little girl and she was only at the beginning stage of meditation. The difference between the male demon and her was too great. If she didn't use the teeth of the emperor to surprise attack him, the male demon could have used his strong chi and held through the power of the falling rain whip to kill her forcefully. But the current situation was still not positive. The techniques that male demon used were too strange. They followed certain paths that cannot be understood. His attacks traveled freely in the darkness of the night. Although her whip could bring about the wind and rain from all directions and protect herself, it couldn't capture the whereabout of the enemy, which meant that she couldn't attack. If she couldn't attack, then how was she able to sustain the defense any much longer? Even if the falling rain whip was a legendary weapon, Luo Luo still needed her soul to use it. With each raindrop or gust of wind, a trace of her chi was used. She started to breathe more rapidly and heavily. She didn't know if she could hold her ground for the weird magical weapon of the enemy expired or for her people to arrive. She was still struggling with an unmovable determination. She waited patiently. She was waiting for the man to truly show himself. She used all of the magical weapons on her, yet she still couldn't escape. She still had the whip, but most importantly, she was hiding her ways. Only she knew that the weapon she held in her hands was the falling rain whip, but the technique she used was that of a sword. The sword technique also contained wind and rain. Wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong. The most powerful point of this sword technique was that it could concentrate the wind and rain into one single point and attack the most fragile part of the enemy. The male demon was already hurt and wasn't at his peak anymore. She was confident that if a chance showed up, she could definitely kill the enemy. But the problem was that although the man was enraged after being wounded, he still didn't lose his conscience. He appeared to be extremely patient. Before he was entirely sure of his chance to kill her. Now he would use his strange technique and avoid the wind and rain. He didn't give her any chance to attack. Luo Luo suddenly felt cheated. The techniques of the demon race were always mysterious and hard to understand. But if she could master the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong and realize the true core of the wind and rain of 8 direction, how would she be in such a passive situation? Why didn't the teachers of Heavenly Academy and the Starseeker Academy know how to teach her? If she could find the person from that night, could he teach her? Right, if it weren't for this person, how would she ambushed and be in such a bad position? Yes, it was all that person's fault. Editor Bingo. Girl, please stop being spoiled, and it was your own fault. Because Luo Luo felt cheated, she didn't want to be generous. She decided that if she found that person in the future, she wouldn't give him that many presents anymore. Perhaps, take away half of the gifts. Although Luo Luo was thinking about this, the battle still raged on. Danger approached with merciless steps. A wound appeared on her neck. The male demon caught a weak point of the falling rain whip and gave an almost life-threatening blow. Not only did Luo Luo feel cheated, she was also sad. She didn't want to die. She always felt that living was the happiest thing, and the most beautiful thing. You see, the clouds in the sky are pretty and the clouds in the capital are magical. Sometimes they looked like the hair of the ladies on the street. The clouds of her homeland were also beautiful, just like the face of a young bandit. Even if she was to die, she felt that she couldn't die in the capital because many innocent people would die for her death, like the lady on the street, or the young bandit. Luo Luo started to lose more and more blood. The falling rain whip got weaker and weaker. The male demon was still hiding in the darkness of the night. She felt tired and sleepy. The falling rain whip lashed through the night silently and the wind and rain was quiet as well. The demon also didn't make any sound. Silence surrounded the Tradition Academy. It was most suitable for sleeping. Besides playing and shioshing, Luo Luo loved to sleep. She knew she couldn't sleep at a time like this, but she really was sleepy. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. The Tradition Academy woke up. So did Luo Luo. Absorb the starlight into the chest and let the qi flow freely. Lift your wrist to the shoulder and hold back the wind and rain. Luo Luo didn't know who was speaking. But she knew it was the contents of the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong. She instinctively held her whip and flipped her wrist. She lifted her left knee and the qi flew upward. Ignoring the veins spoken about in the sword technique, the qi flew straight into the body and skipped the stomach into the chest. She felt her hands holding the whip and started to heat up. What's next, she thought with a confused expression. The night was still dark. The sound came up again. Do Zhen, Kue Lu. The two words with weird pronunciations were heard. But if they were separated, then people living in this world would easily understand what they are. Do Zhen were the two stars located respectively on the east and the west. Kue Lu were the two stars located respectively on the south and north. Stars stayed still forever, especially the famous stars. People who lived on the ground regardless of age all clearly remembered the stars' positions. Luo Luo was dazed. She didn't understand the meaning. Where were these locations? Was she supposed to stab to where the star Do was? How about Zhen? Suddenly, she understood. Between Do and Zhen, she could draw a line. And between Kue and Lu, she could also draw a line. The intersection of the lines was the only point in the sky. Luo Luo opened up her eyes widely, looking towards that place. The falling rain whip in her hand was already stabbing towards the point in the sky. The falling rain whip gathered all the rain and wind into one line. The hundreds of wind and rain became a sword. Wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong. In the Tradition Academy, the wind and rain suddenly grew smaller but the sword spirit became much stronger. Qi, a sound, blood was blown out from the dark sky. At the same time, the elite demon gave an angry and painful call.